you get consumed when you're coaching. In my lifetime, at 30 years of high school sports, and dovetailing that at the same time coaching community hockey and competitive hockey, I never got off the bandwagon, and I did miss many of those occasions. And to this day, I have to admit I regret not being there for many of the events in my daughter's lives, and that's what I can't imagine. Mike, yourself, a full-time coach, and it's 24/7 year round. I don't know that you really can take a holiday, but um, it's consuming. You're totally right, Matt. And I, uh, I always wondered how people on board were able to maintain a balance where they could, you know, be mentally healthier and enjoy their experience more. And um, I'm just wondering if anybody, Mike, you could speak to that. How do you relate to Matt's story and how it affects your personal life and the time and how you manage to balance things? You're
Well,
home now, but
yeah.
if you can
Well,
dovetail.
Matt, honestly, I've I knew I had to come on today, and I don't know why. We don't know each other and everything else, but Wally put out a little blurb about your background and that piqued my interest. And I have a I have a question first before I get into it, because a lot of the stuff that you talked about really hit home. Did you have a niggling, let's just call it a guilty conscience, once your daughter, you have one child?
Yep.
Okay. And then you're in coaching, you have your child. Was it a niggling kind of guilty conscience that all of a sudden you got to this point and you knew you wanted to make a change? The opportunity arose at the right time, and it was just like great. Had you been carrying that with you for a while, or is this something just over the last couple of years that you felt creeping in?
No, I would say just before COVID. So before we knew, my wife was at that point was applying to be a judge. It wasn't a guarantee, so she was still a lawyer, but pretty busy. And I had a few years. So my daughter, roughly between when she was like 4 and 6, I was, as I think we all are, and Wally just alluded to it. I mean, you just become consumed by it, and I don't have the luxury, at least Queen's not yet. And I better say Queen's is extremely supportive of its coaches, but we don't have full-time assistant coaches. So I'm jack of all trades with the program as well, right? So it's not just head coach. You're doing all the scouting and ordering of the gear and all of it, right? So it does become pretty consuming. And those couple of years, I was finding it a bit more of a grind. I found my passion for it and love for the sport and the team and the school was getting me through, but I wasn't the person at home that I wanted to be. You know what I mean? And when I was at home. So it was I was starting to get some guilt, I guess, because of it. I was starting to have some self-reflection. And while we all would have rather not have gone through the pandemic, the timing of the pandemic probably could not have been better for me from that perspective, because it forced me to put the brakes on. And I'm super thankful that I got a year and a half, from when my daughter was roughly 7 to 8.5 with my family, and didn't have. And once those pressures were gone, man, it just and so and then during that time, my wife had the career change. So I think at that point it started to evolve into a like, I wonder, because I always thought I'd just do this till 60. And some thoughts and discussions with my wife about, okay, really, how far are we going to take this? I knew I wanted to at least put this past year, and I knew the team had some potential, and I didn't want to leave coaching after like a pandemic year. It just felt wrong. But even after having those thoughts in the last couple of weeks, or after our last loss, I hadn't gone out and hired a headhunter or looked at the want ads just yet. And I certainly appreciate that my, the athletic director coming to me with this position or asking me about it, it's kind of unique to my circumstances. That's a long answer to your question, but I think pre-pandemic, I was having some thoughts about, okay, like, is this sustainable for me, my own mental health, and is it sustainable for the father and husband that I want to be, right?
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
No, and that really hits home. And I mean, it's coaching is coaching. Geez, coming back to the pandemic. I got fired the spring before the pandemic, 2 weeks before it really kind of blew up around the world. And so I was home. Luckily, I was being paid. I had another year on my contract during that year, 2021. And it was the first time I'd been in Calgary. I've been a pseudo Calgarian for over 30 years. It was the first winter that I've spent in Calgary since 1988, since the Olympics, since I was 16 years old. Then went to college and then turned pro. And you come back in the summers and everything else. And for the first time in a number of years, we have 3 children, my wife and I, and we had everybody under the same roof for the first time. Even my son went to a hockey academy in Austria when we were in Germany. So he was 14, he's out of the house, and all of a sudden, there's one less. And all 5 of us were under one roof. My son was playing in the AJ here in Alberta. My daughters were, getting through high school, but we were all together. We had more family suppers together in that first month than we'd had in the previous 5 years.
Right.
And that gave me some time to really sit back and reflect about where we are, because the coaching game, as much as it is a passion, then you put the pro side of it on top of it as well. Like this is how I provide for my family as well. And it's, I've made a couple decisions that, where I'm chasing the bucks rather than maybe going into to a good circumstance. Not willfully. Actually, I was sold a bill of goods that wasn't exactly true going to Cologne, but that's another story. And just so on top of that, this is a little long-winded. My boy's now 21. He's playing at UFC, playing hockey there. My girls are 19 and 18. And 4 years ago, before the pandemic, we always knew it was going to happen because my kids were all born in Europe. We've been going back. We moved the whole circus back and forth every year. Kids are going to Austrian and German school, depending on which country we were in. And we're fully integrated. We all speak German. We've been there a long time. We've integrated ourselves into that culture as well. And we knew that at some point, in particular because of the school situation, we always came back, or at least Tara and my kids came back, and my kids would go to school here in Calgary for 2.5 months because we became aware that we wanted our kids to grow up Canadian more than German or Austrian, and also to keep their English language skills as high as possible. Because even though they're taking English over there, it's not at the same level of once you're talking about following your educational path. But then all of a sudden, my son wanted to come back and play hockey in Alberta. And my girls were at a point where they were entering high school. And my wife, it went this quick, looked at me and said, Michael, I think it's hit us. We have to transition pretty much full time back to North America, back to Calgary. And I was like, geez, I don't think so. We went back and forth. And sort of on the quick, all of a sudden we came to the realization, yeah, this needs to happen. And it was for our kids, right? We couldn't have this two world kind of integration. It had to be one or the other. Another little aside, because school over in Europe goes until the end of July. And once you get into, they call it, we're going down the rabbit hole. The school system over there, there's kind of 3 tracks of higher learning. There's Matura, which is actually kind of, you're preparing to go to university. There's a second tier and a third tier. And that's decided by the time they're 10, which path you're going to be going on. You can transition back and forth. Going up is extremely hard. But so school goes to the end of July. Well, my work starts August 1st. We start early over in Europe. So that would have taken out coming back home. It's either full-time in Germany or full-time back home. There was no crossover anymore.
Mhm.
So the last 4 years, I've been going over by myself because, again, this is the way I provide and I love what I do. The kids were at a stage where we thought, okay, if this has an adverse effect on my kids, then okay, I'll come back home and we'll figure it out. But that hasn't been the case. They've been finding their own way, but I've had that niggling in the back of my head. And long story long, I've had that niggling in the back of my head for a while because we make it work, and my kids are on good paths. They're finding their ways. They're competent and polite, and I have zero issue that way. But I missed a lot. Like, never mind, even when we were together over in Germany and in Austria, I'm trying to, I was played for a long time. That was way better because at least you're just you were tired, but you were home. But then in the coaching world, and that was the next part for my wife, is that getting into the coaching world as a wife, you're really on an island. My kids would go to school, they'd be in activities, made friends like that. They speak German, easy. I go to work, I have interaction with my staff, with my players, my bosses, but my wife, we changed towns and all of a sudden she's starting from scratch. And so I felt like I kind of owed her this. So it's been really good for my wife. She's got a startup that she's been working on the last 2 years, trying to get it on its feet. My kids are finding their way, but we're a fractured family in that I'm 8 months out of the year, 9 months out of the year, I'm not here. They fly over when they can. I fly back in February when we have a national team break. But long story, but a lot of what you spoke to today resonates with me because the tough decisions need to be made.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Mike. I really appreciate that. And yeah, I am going to very confidently suggest that you and I are not the only ones.
Yeah.
And you and I have very different stories, but the underlying themes are identical, right? And so I'm sure we're not the only ones that have that thought and are faced with difficult choices to follow our passions. And then, to be honest with you, I imagine there's a lot of other careers that are similar, and we're just talking hockey coaches, but I mean, we all know just how we maybe we even politely call it passion. I mean, it borders on obsession sometimes, right? And that's where you've got to really, you've got to really realize, okay, do you have the blinders on, or are you thinking about not only yourself internally and what it's doing, but how it's affecting everybody else, right? And so, yeah, thanks for sharing that. And that's a tough one. I mean, having a family that supports and understands and is willing to nourish and allow us the opportunity to even do this for a year, let alone 10 plus, is a gift, and certainly lucky to have that. But it still doesn't diminish the fact that there are times when we're just absent, either physically or just mentally, right? Yeah,
absolutely. No, and that's one of the, I mean, I've never met your wife. Sounds like she's very accomplished and everything else, but without that support in hockey, I'll tell you right now, that's why there's so many, I don't know, how many divorced pro coaches there are out there. I mean, I could list them off, and yeah. I'm incredibly thankful to my wife that put up with my BS and knew that this is what I wanted, and she believes that I'm good at it. That helps. But no, without that support or without that understanding, you have zero chance of working in hockey. Zero.
Yeah.
What's asked of coaches, doesn't matter at what level right now, you get to, I'd say, junior A and up, and that absolutely includes U Sports and NCAA. What's asked of coaches these days is above and beyond. Like, I played 18 years pro, and the coaches that I had, I mean, they were great at the time, but that was just the way coaching was at that time. Shit, you could be at the rink for 6 hours and still be, good at your job, and your bosses are happy with your work. And right now, even the optics of being in and out of the rink, that just does not fly anymore. My bosses they need to feel that you're actually putting in the work. And if you're doing the work properly, you need to invest time in this day and age.
Yeah, that's just it. I mean, you talk about the support internally with your family, but having the support of your organization, your immediate superiors or whatever, and their philosophy is an important piece of it too, right? And I'm lucky. Queens, don't get me wrong, Queens wants us to win banners and championships, but there is a recognition that coaching capacity is a thing, and like I said, it's if we're there to try to manage and nourish the holistic student athlete, so it's their hockey career, it's their academic career, socially, emotionally, mentally, then we've got to lead by example in that way as well, right? And it's tough though. You're right, but you could have outside pressures from the organization perhaps, but who's getting who? Even with an org like when I was at Queens, and they were supportive of making sure that the coaches were working on their own mental health. A lot of it is just self-driven as well. We just know how internally self-driven we are, and even with a family and an organization that is supportive of, I'll just say, the odd day off, it's just tough internally. It's just tough internally to turn that tap off and to say, well, you know what, I guess I could, but I have a chance to go scout this game half an hour away, and there's a pretty good player there that I might want to meet, and you know what I mean? Like, it's just it's so hard. It's so hard to turn that off, and in part it makes it it makes what it's in part what makes people great coaches, but is it sustainable, right?
But that's sustainable, and then finding that balance. And I mean, I've been at this long enough where it's not time management, it's me management.
Yeah.
And I self-discipline to, my waistline's bigger than I'd like it to be.
Sure.
I've been meditating since I was first exposed to it when I was 16 or 17 years old. I know it's good for me. I know it does me good. I don't do it often enough. And this is my internal battle as a coach. And it's not X's and O's. Like, I'm past that now. It's developing the soft skills for me to manage my team. That's where I know I need to improve, or need to continue to evolve. And then also taking care of myself and my staff. Because at what point you hate when you see guys. I mean, I've seen guys that have burnt themselves out, and they become a shell of themselves, or they become super cynical, or everything's super negative. I mean, there's multiple different ways where the job can crush you.
Yeah. What I do find in the last, maybe since the pandemic at least, is I think it's becoming more and more okay to talk about this, and for coaches to admit, without seeming weak or diminishing their ability to lead, to show some vulnerability and to admit exactly what we're talking about. And I think there's even been a couple examples in the pro ranks, where coaches, I want to say in their prime, but and there might be other reasons, but I know, Paul Maurice stepped aside, and I don't know all the details, so I'm not, but he just sort of stepped aside of his own accord. Barry Trotz took some time off. Here's coaches that are in the prime of their, their coaching careers, and voluntarily just, taking a step back. And again, I don't know them personally, so there could be other reasons, but generally speaking, I think that's a good thing. And I go back to Cody Royal's book, and if you haven't read it, Mike, I totally recommend you pick it up, because it was a breath of fresh air, and it just, I'm like, oh my God, thank God. I thought it was the only one sort of thinking these thoughts behind closed doors. Right.
Yeah. A little aside, have you ever run across Dan Ratushny?
So I know the name. So he was what's
the last name?
Ratushny.
Yeah, I coached him in the Spengler Cup.
Yeah, okay, yeah, he's an Ontario guy, and he played a number of years, and then he became a lawyer, and he was downtown Toronto, and said, I don't like this. I want to get back into hockey, and so he jumped back into coaching.
Yeah, well, we talked about this when Wally had me on a couple of years ago. You look at Peter DeBoer and John Cooper, and they're they're former lawyers who just said, let's
I didn't
get
know
it.
that about DeBoer. Is that right?
I'm pretty sure. I'm
Okay.
fairly certain.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I'm fairly certain he was. No, I think honestly, I may have played against Dan.
It would
Like
make sense. Yeah,
mid to late 80s, and because I think was he originally an Ottawa guy?
I think so. I think that's right.
Yeah.
We'll look him
And
up.
then, geez, did he play in Pembroke? I can't recall. I know the name. I know, but it's more from a hockey perspective in the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, so he was born in 70.
Yeah.
Nepean?
Yeah, Ottawa. Yeah, just outside Ottawa. That's it. Yeah, of course. Yeah, okay.
It's Cornell after that.
Yeah.
I got a story on Dan. His dad, I went to University of Saskatchewan with him. I believe he's a Supreme Court judge. He may not be doing it anymore, but back in his day, they had the law students at the U of S had a band, and they wore civil War Army uniforms and would march on the ice in the middle of a period. And they were good musicians, but they were also half crocked. They would interrupt the men's game. People came to the game because the band was coming. And real character guys. So I thought you'd want to know that there's so many little stories here that go on the behind. I had a couple questions that I wanted to ask. We talked about, what makes a good coach, and I'm watching people on the bench now. Brendan Moore's enthusiasm and how the team performs for him, and I look at the highly educated coaches. I call them academic, and they may be lawyers. They may not be lawyers, but they have a different bench demeanor. They seem to be more composed, and I'm really curious. Like Matt, when you were on earlier, did your legal experience complement what you were going to have to do, and will it help you moving forward in any way?
Yeah. I think some of the legal. I will start with the end of that question. I think my legal experience will help me with, again, some of the policies that we're going to be reviewing, and contracts, and critical thinking and analytical thinking, and there are some legal issues that arise, and again, ultimately we'll push those to the Queen's lawyers, but no, I think. But no, absolutely. I mean, I think that some of the experience and training gained by being a lawyer benefited me as a coach. I mean, I was a litigation lawyer, so every week I was preparing for a trial, much like you're preparing for a weekend opponent. It was very much win-loss. But I had to stand up in front of judges and make reasoned and principled arguments under pressure, but in a professional way. So there's no swearing at the ref in a courtroom type scenario, right? Like you're trained to be very respectful, even though it's a very heated and principled argument. It's all done very civilly, right? And so thinking quick on my feet, presenting an argument like that, giving oral persuasion and whatnot, those things immediately transferred over. I had no problem with that. And I'm proud to say that after 14 years as head coach, I didn't take one bench minor penalty, right? And not one. And yet, I extremely competitive. Did I have some very energetic discussions with the refs? Absolutely. But I kept it respectful. I didn't embarrass them. I didn't demean them. I didn't swear at them. I came close a few times and they just give me that, that final look, like one more and you're, what I mean? And I'm like, okay, I get it. Thank you. So yeah, I think that those skills certainly helped. Plus I also, I wanted the players to play the game the right way and not, and control the controllables and focus on the things they can focus on. And so again, if their coach is behind them yelling at the refs and being concerned about that the whole time, then that's going to bleed into the players as well, right? So it's also just leading by example. But no, absolutely. I think in terms of preparation, in terms of thinking on my feet under pressure, in terms of how I communicate, absolutely those skills translated.
One of the things that I wanted to comment on, and thanks very much, Matt, for sharing your story, and Mike, and the word perspective seems to be the underlying factor in this discussion, is that we get caught up on we're on the hamster wheel and we wonder what we're doing. And I think it's the ability to reflect, think about it, talk about it, like this is, in a sense, this is a bit of a confession or a self-actualization moment to realize that what we're doing is important, but what really matters is what we've got to know. And so knowing your why and why you do things is critical. And I threw out the word perspective for a very good reason. I work with a young company which was mentoring coaches in a small community outside of Calgary. They were called P3 Sports. And the 3 P's stood for passion. Let's see, what was it? Passion, power, and performance. And at the annual meeting of the staff after a golf tournament, they would discuss things, make planning, and I convinced them to change the word power to perspective. And if you have perspective in what you're doing and why you're doing it, it'll affect how you do it and how you feel about what you're doing. And they did change that word, and I really believe that all my life that's sort of been the bottom line of how I coached. I just didn't have an appreciation of the importance of a family to the degree where I did get on the bandwagon of coaching. I rarely saw my kids from 8 in the morning till 10 at night. We did have holidays. I coached them in school sports. But when all was said and done, and my wife had passed away, and they named an arena after me, and the 3 daughters were there, that was the biggest regret I had, is as sorry as I was about that, I did get to affect so many young ladies in female hockey and so many athletes that it was sort of I'm not calling it an excuse, I'm just calling it an influential factor that helped me accept it. But I don't think you can go through life not being sorry about anything, but while you're there, make the best of it, because it goes by so quick. So